Okay, so before I start, I should just caveat this a little bit. I will be talking specifically about the building fabric and the change from 6-star regulations pre-NCC 2022 to 7-star regulations post-NCC 2022, with a focus on Class 1. So we do have data on Class 2. I can talk about that, but I just assumed that the people in the room would be more interested in Class 1 for the purposes of this conversation. And we don't yet have data flowing on the whole of home provisions that I can share with you. So this is strictly building fabric at the moment. So NATHER's use in Queensland, you can see there are some average star ratings there across the different climate zones that are in Queensland. So that's by climate zone in the year to 1 May 2024 that you're seeing there. Just a bit of background. So a little bit on NATHER's use in Queensland. Queensland has a reasonably low use of NATHERs compared to some of the other states and territories. So for Class 1, 58 of certificates are generated for every 100 building permits issued. So this is comparing NATHER's certificate data to the Australian Bureau of Statistics building permits data. And for Class 2, 77 certificates for every 100 permits and increasing. This is a bit of a view of how quickly is industry starting to take on the 7-star minimum standard. So Queensland was already converging on 7-star ahead of 1 May 2024. There were already a reasonably high percentage of residences that were complying with or overachieving 7 stars. There's been a slight quickening of pace that we've seen since. You can see the red dashed line there for when NCC 2022 was implemented. And what does the certificate data tell us? So this is a bit of a complex table, so I'm going to go through it in a little bit of detail, and hopefully my animations will work. So what you're seeing here is a comparison of the certificates generated to the 6-star standard before 1 May 2024 and the certificates generated after 1 May 2024 in the 7 to 8-star bin, basically. So what I'm trying to do here with this chart is compare how people were complying with the 6-star regulation, so just above 6-star, with how they're complying with just above 7-star since the change in regs. So you can see here, these are the certificates generated before 1 May 2024. And this is the certificates generated after 1 May 2024. This was the minimum, what minimum standards looked like when people were building to the previous standard, and this is the minimum standards now. So when we look at the average star rating, we can see that there has been a change from 6.4 average star rating up to 7.4 average star rating. So essentially there's been a jump of 1 star in the data that we've seen so far. When you look at the total floor area less garage, there's been absolutely no change, an average of 128 square meters. When you look at the window area, we've seen a slight decrease of 2 square meters, which represents a change from 22.4% of the window to floor area ratio down to 21.25%. So that's essentially the only change that we can see in the aggregate data. So then we have a look at the floor types and have a look comparing pre and post NCC 2022. Basically, there has been a slight shift away from waffle pod towards concrete slab on ground, for reasons I don't completely understand in Queensland. And there's been absolutely no change in the number of timber floor constructions and so on coming through. There's no change in wall types. So this is what the wall type split looks like. Can people see the text on that? It's a little bit small for me to see on my screen, but we'll share the slides afterwards, I hope, and you should be able to read it on the slides. Essentially, that's brick veneer at the top. Then there's AAC's the next one down, and I think it's fibre cement is the third one down. So the dominant wall type that's being, those. And there's concrete block is the other large one about halfway down. But there's been no change in these percentages pre and post NCC 2022. Insulation, we have seen some changes, so I hope that's a bit more readable, but essentially what you've got down the bottom is different R values, and you can see that we have gone from, my glasses on this, it's I can't see the actual R value there, but the lower R value average has gone down, and there has been an increase in higher R values in those constructions. This is ceiling insulation. This one's yeah, sorry, and similarly here in what do we look at? Wall insulation. We've seen the dominant kind of insulation value at the lower levels go down and increase at the higher R values. The orange there is insulation unknown, which can represent SIPS panels and things like that, where it's not an added R value. So what we can pick up in the certificate data is added R value. If the R value is integral to the product that's being used, it will often show up as unknown insulation, which is what that orange bar represents there. So we've seen an increase in insulation values from 6-star to 7-star. We've seen very little change in double glazing. What you're looking at there is the percentage of single glazed to double glazed, and that's essentially gone from 0.5% to about 1.5%, which I would call in the noise, really. There's been very little measurable change in the amount of double glazing going in Queensland. And the you don't have to understand these kind of windrows or these orientation charts very much. All it's showing on those charts is that there is no real dominance of any particular orientation. So dwellings are being oriented north, south, east, west in relatively equal proportions, and that hasn't changed post 7-star regulations either. So yeah, very little double glazing used. Higher percentage of class 2 do have double glazing, which may be explained by soundproofing and other things, and has increased marginally since the 2022 changes, and orientation unchanged. So that's the story as far as we can tell so far from the NatHERS data. There's been an increase in insulation. There's been very little change in double glazing. There's been no change in floor area. So we're not seeing huge changes to building fabric have been necessary. There's a number of things the certificate doesn't show us. Configurations of rooms. Are people orienting living areas to the north more or to another particular orientation? Things like that don't show up in the certificates. But the kind of coarse building fabric changes that we would expect to see, slightly smaller windows, slightly increased insulation, are there, but we're not seeing some of the more expensive things like double glazing starting to predominate or anything like that at this point in time. All mistakes are mine, all credit for data visualizations, and all further requests for data can go to Michael Ambrose at CSIRO, who's the data guru who puts all of these things together for us. So thanks, Paige. I hope I'm more or less on time.